Hey,
There we go.
Alan,
Swear I've
good to
used
have you
computers
join us.
before.
Uh, Things are too high tech these days. All right, so infrastructure as code, that's what we're all here to talk about today, has changed the game by making infrastructure repeatable, testable, version controlled, and enter AI and ML, and they're now resetting the game rules a little. All the things we've come to know and love, from auto-generating modules to predicting misconfigurations before they happen. What we're seeing today is only the beginning. I just did some research before I joined this panel so I could share some real world stats. In case you missed it, Firefly, from my very own community, dropped the State of Infrastructure as Code report recently, and you should definitely check that out. And some pretty interesting insights related to AI and ML in the world of IaC. At least 17% of teams are already using AI-driven capabilities in their cloud ops. Another 41% are actively exploring solutions or planning to use AI assistance in the next 6 months, but none are fully AI managed yet. So there is some room kind of to explore what's happening in the industry. This also raises a lot of questions, which we'll be tapping into our panelists to answer. When will the machine overlords be taking over, if at all? Are we trading velocity for trust? What does this all mean for engineering workflows and IaC best practices? So I'm thrilled to have this stellar panel with us today. Robert Hafner, distinguished engineer at Comcast and author of Terraform in Depth, and Alan Helton, ecosystem engineer at Momento and AWS Hero, two experts in the weeds of infrastructure, tooling, automation, from the very beginning. And they're going to give us some insights on where it's all going. So before we kick off with some questions for me, I'd love for them to introduce themselves and tell us what kind of how they're connected to this panel and why it's interesting to them. And also prepare your own questions and grill them hard, because you don't get it every day is an opportunity to tap into these types of experts. So go right ahead, Robert, and introduce yourself.
Yep, so I'm Rob Hafner, a Terraform in-depth author. But what most people don't know is that I actually spend most of my time doing machine learning. Starting in 2014, I worked at Vicarious AI, which was doing both visual robotics and other types of AI before I switched off to Rad AI, where I was the founding engineer. Chances are, if you've had any radiologist appointment in the last year, you've probably actually used their software without even knowing it. Now, in my day job, I help bring AI to platform and product teams inside of Comcast.
Oh, very cool. Alan.
And I am Alan Helton. I'm an ecosystem engineer at Momento. I've spent most of my career actually in the public sector building software for governments. So I've been neck deep in regulation and all the fun stuff that goes along with building things for the government. Right now, I am fully submerged into the AI world. I run a web show that is all about AI and the bleeding edge on everything there. And being an AWS hero as well, I also get privy to the information of the very latest and greatest that comes out of there when it relates to AI.
That's awesome. So I'm really excited to have you both here. Reminding the audience, we have on the screen on the left Q&A, and you can raise your hand. And if you're bold enough, you get to be added to the stream itself. So we'd love to get audience participation as well. Feel free to ask your questions, but let's kick it off. So yeah, we're seeing a rise, an explosion of AI-generated code, Terraform, Helm, Kubernetes, YAML. So I guess what we're all thinking is, what are the pros and cons of relying on AI for this foundational layer of infrastructure? Like, where's the dumpster fire? Alan, take it away.
So I think really we need to level set with the understanding that there's two types of AI when we're talking about using AI for something, and that's automated agents, which do everything for you. It's a completely hands-off approach, which is what I think most people assume when they hear, let's do something with AI. Definitely what my parents and what my wife thinks that are not in tech. And then there's also human in the loop, which is where it's actually a human that is going back and forth with AI that's doing trust but verify style of back and forth, really. And that is where I think we need to camp out with infrastructure as code, is the second human in the loop. Let's not let them do everything, at least yet, because it's not good enough to just be trusted on hand. So I am absolutely excited about everything that we've built in the past 6 months when it comes to human in the loop with AI, where you can hook it up to your knowledge bases, where you can attach guardrails to it, where really these LLMs are becoming an expert in how you as an organization are defining IaC. So you can just say, hey, here's everything that I've done. Can you help me do this new thing?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Robert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think back to 2014 in a news article. My dad's a truck driver, and I remember the article about how 1.8 million people are going to be out of the job in the next 2 years because of self-driving. And again, that was 2014. 10 years later, my dad is still employed, working his way towards retirement. I think what Alan hit on is absolutely critical. It's that human in the loop side of things. When you deal with AI, there's this problem called the long tail problem. You can go and build a model and it's very easy to get that 80% accuracy, but then getting up another level takes more work, and then another level. And that graph just kind of goes and slowly shrinks down, but you still have so many things it can't do. And in my experience, the companies who look at AI as something to augment people are the ones who are being really successful. They're having their people act as people just engaging with tools and using those tools to build and grow projects. The companies that think that they're able to just completely remove the human from the loop are the ones that I probably wouldn't invest in or something like that. They're the ones that I've seen really fail over time. Like you look at something, I mentioned Rad AI, that was for radiologists, but they kept humans in the loop the whole time. They didn't try to automate it. And there were dozens of other companies that came out at the same time, and most of them don't exist anymore because they think they could just solve the problem completely. But if you take human and AI and you put them together, you could potentially do better than either one of them apart.
I have to say the chat is pretty hilarious. It's like I'd allow a self-driving car, but I wouldn't let anybody I wouldn't let an AI touch my servers. So yes, I think the last mile problem has always been a problem kind of in ops, and I agree that it's also kind of where we're at with AI. That's one of the things that kind of the folks from Spacelift had me thinking about when they said like kind of the last 1% to 2% is like kind of not going to be automatable, but probably likely without supervision, which is what you just said. So I guess one of the questions is like, is it more like MLOps is the future, AI ops, like is the human kind of doing that like last, operational management, maintenance, all of that?
Who do we want to start for? I'll just take it.
Feel free.
So I do feel like MLOps, that tends to be more about like training these models, deploying them. And I think the average person isn't going to get into that too much. They might get into it where it's more of like a deployment of models, such as open source models. But I think for the average group, the average person actually building out models and attempting to deploy them is probably not going to be a thing that they typically have to do. But I do think that the average person is going to have to. Somebody told me, somebody I was talking to recently at work, mentioned that people are going to need to become analysts in like stronger way than they currently are. Because if you transition from I'm writing every line of code to something else is writing the code, you're all of a sudden kind of doing a lot of pull request review essentially from your own AI. And so you need to understand what's happening there, understand what's being put out. And then you also need to learn how to kind of communicate with the AI to get those results, something that's going to change model to model. And so, I do think that the expertise in being able to read and understand the code is always going to be there. And you're still going to have to be able to build these models in your head of what it is you're trying to build in your project. Mm-hmm. But I think that you might be able to focus a little bit less on syntax, a little bit less on those things because they're just getting filled out for you. And when it comes to like larger refactoring and stuff, these tools really are phenomenal. Like I've used agent mode to kind of refactor some pretty large files, have them shrink them down into functions and things like that. But so far, I've never seen it not introduce at least a little bit of a code smell or a little bit of a bug, at which point, as a human, you need to kind of engage and correct that, fix that. But that requires you to also be able to identify that. And so really, as weird as it sounds, like I know people kind of don't put as much effort into their pull request reviews as they should be. But the reality is your job is going to be a lot more pull request review style work, even if it's still in the IDE going forward.
That makes a lot of sense. I'll let Alan answer, and I see that questions are coming in from the audience, so we'll take some of those.
Okay, I'll make this one quick then. I totally agree, Rob. One of the things that I want to kind of clarify with what the question was do we consider this MLOps? I don't, and I think there's a distinction that we need to make between using AI and assuming it's going to do X, Y, and Z, just kind of out of the box, replace our jobs, all that fun stuff, versus using it as a tool. And I approached generative AI for the first basically year and a half as this is probably going to replace me one day type of assumption. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but definitely is what I was doing. And then I started thinking about it more critically as I started getting into deeper and deeper use cases. And really kind of something clicked in my head that everything that I'm using AI for is just a tool in the toolbox. It's helping me do smarter autocompletes. It's doing research for me and spitting stuff back. In fact, just this morning, Rob, to compound on what you said, you still need to know code. That is absolutely something that you're going to have to do. I was writing an AI agent this morning, and I was using A2A to use that communication protocol. And I was trying to refactor it from using Express behind the scenes to Hono. And I just asked ChatGPT, hey, can you do this for me, please? And it said, sure. And it rewrote the whole thing, and it reduced my file from like 850 lines to 180 lines. And, there's that code smell. It's like, there's no way that's true. And I had to go in and I was looking and I was like, hey, you forgot this piece, or why did you do it this way? That's not right. And it's something that you just always have to go in and do basically like a checks and balance, but assume that you're using a tool and not a replacement.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree. I'm going to take a couple of audience questions. We'll start with Jeffrey's. Is it accurate to say that the quality of RAG data is more important to Gen AI IaC than the LLM itself? Seems to me that most modern LLMs are all above the minimum level needed to code if they have the proper context given to them. Alan, go ahead.
I would say yes, absolutely. You can go and you can get a stock answer for something any day of the week from an LLM, but whether or not it adheres to the standards that you're used to is going to depend on the quality of that RAG data. RAG, if anyone is not familiar with the phrase retrieval augmented generation, G.
Yes.
Where it's going and it's using a database or some sort of knowledge base to enhance its knowledge or its context. So if you give it high quality information about how you do things, you are going to get a higher quality, more adherent to standards response back out of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I tend to agree, and Robert, I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I agree with most of what you say. I'm going to disagree a little that the RAG is more important than the LLM. I think that they are both in many ways equally important. Like without the LLM, you can't do anything with the RAG. The RAGs are useless. And without the RAGs, your LLMs are always going to be outdated, always going to be in the past, simply because it takes forever to actually train them. But I think as new architectures come out, you're seeing things like mixture of experts, you're seeing different training methods. I think you're seeing LLMs improve, and like we're adding in reasoning type work. And that kind of stuff actually shows a huge improvement when doing like code generation or something similar. So I think you really need both because without, in my earlier talk on testing, I showed if you tried to use Terraform native testing, it's just going to fail because it doesn't know anything. Without a RAG, you're kind of not able to do some things. You're not going to be able to stay current. But as the LLMs also improve, you're getting much, much better results with it. So I think both of them kind of just work hand in hand. And if we don't see improvements in either of them, like things will be static. If we see improvement in either side, we're going to see improvement in our results. So I'm more of a neither is more important than the other. I think it kind of falls apart without one.
That's great answers. I'm going to take a couple more questions from the audience. We'll try and get to all of them. There are quite a few. So if we don't get to everything, know that Robert and Alan have additional sessions today, and you can join them and you can ask them questions there. I'm going to keep at it. And Katrina has a good question. With the increase of AI usage in IaC development, how do you think engineers, especially those freshly entering the field, will need to adapt their skill set to be desirable, hireable, and successful? Alan.
Oh my gosh, this is it's such a relevant question with such a hard answer. I've been thinking about this a lot, not necessarily from the context of just infrastructure as code, but from software development in general. It's like, what do senior engineers look like in 10 years? Do they have the foundational knowledge of patterns, system design, and sometimes low-level programming as engineers today do? And you think, well, they won't because the tools are there, but you also have to think about, do they need it? Are the tools in 10 years going to be good enough to where that's not a necessary skill to have? It's something that I struggle to answer because I really don't know. This AI web show that I talked about early on, I do it every 2 weeks, and basically every 2 weeks I'm saying, don't do anything that I said the last 2 weeks because things have changed on their head in just the past 2 weeks. It's completely different now. So trying to project in even a 3-year time span is incredibly difficult. I'll do my best to try to answer. The adaptation for the skill sets, you're going to have to know how to use these tools. You can't go in and say, I've never used ChatGPT or Claude, whatever the LLM is at the time. You're just not going to be able to say that anymore when it comes to being I don't want to say successful software engineer, but to have an easy start. We'll say that. That's the softest way I can put it.
Okay. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah. I think there have been a ton of paradigm changes in this industry since I joined. I'm saying my age here, although the bald head probably helps. I've been in this industry for like 20 years now. And when I started, people, had like a collection of bash scripts, and then, we had configuration as code, infrastructure as code. You have, transition from procedural program, object-oriented, and then back in some cases. Like, the industry changes a lot. And no matter when you get out of school or you join the industry, I think the most important thing for anybody is that they focus on how to learn. If you learn how to learn and you learn how to self-teach, then you can adapt as things change. Like I started in security, I went into AI. Like I've reinvented myself a couple of times over the last 20 years. And you kind of have to in this industry because it moves that fast. So to me, I would say the biggest skill is learn how to learn how to dive deep into things. And I will say, just based off of like interviewing, conversations with people, I can see that there are people coming out of school who really love to learn, and you ask them questions about things. Even if they're using AI, they're using it to kind of assist them. They're using it to learn and bring things in. Maybe they're using it to move a little faster. I've also seen other people who use the AI as an excuse not to learn, as a way to, I don't need to understand this framework. I don't need to understand this library. I don't need to understand this test suite. And I don't have high confidence in their long-term careers, if I'm being perfectly honest. I do think that we're going to reach a point where I don't think we're ever going to reach a point where you don't need to understand what's happening, like at some level. It might be that maybe you don't need to, learn like the super low level stuff. There was a time where people just programmed a notepad, and so they had to memorize like argument orders and stuff. We got IDEs. We don't care about that anymore. AI is going to make us care a little bit less about syntax, but it's still going to make us care about design. You're still going to be deploying systems. You're going to have to care about security, how you maintain it, how you upgrade it, all of those different things around it. And so it's hard to say, like, you need this specific skill today. Like, obviously, this is the stuff that's popular today, so learn it. But the most important thing to me is that when the popular thing comes out next year, or the popular thing comes out after that, you have the skills to also adjust and learn to whatever that happens to be. And that's what keeps you from being left behind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is another question a little bit about the engineering roles and ceilings, but I'll get to that in a minute. I do want to very briefly get out of you because there were several questions kind of on the same topic. Do you have a preferred, really briefly, do you have a preferred AI for like Terraform code generation? They asked, is it Claude 3.7? Gemini, somebody asked if it's, so just let us know if you have one that you think works better than others.
I don't have one I think works better than others in the sense that it's all changing so much and so quickly that I kind of just keep changing around. If I gave advice today, I'd be really worried that somebody watched this talk in 3 months and was like, you totally forgot about this model that actually is coming out in 2 weeks. And so my advice is just be prepared to try these different things, experiment with the new ones as they come out, especially when you see like new architectures and stuff. My other advice is if you could afford it, go buy a nice gaming machine and start loading models up yourself and play around. You don't need anything like absolutely ridiculous. Just go get some like 3090s off of eBay's from a bunch of Bitcoin miners who went bankrupt, and you're good. Do something like that so you have the ability to play with these models maybe even before they get out there.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I do feel like we actually did answer like the question about can there ever be a 100% achieved with AI. So if you want to dig into that, we'll get into that in the Q&A, or maybe Robert or Alan can touch on that in text after. I will take another 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and then we'll see what else we have. I do want to ask about hype cycles before we wrap up. Okay, so let's see what we have here. There was one about homegrown tools that I wanted to, this one. How much do you think there will be a homegrown platform-specific trained models versus leveraging a third-party service integration, or that is like dedicated for the purpose, like Datadog AI Insights or something of the sort?
Can I jump on this one? I know it's probably rude to cut, but like I have such strong opinions that it's actually a third option altogether. I don't believe that people should be, training their own models in most cases, maybe a little fine tuning, but I don't think most people are going to be training models in their own cases. I also don't think that people are going to push this off purely to vendors, because I think right now, at least, the vendors are way over expensive. I actually am a firm believer that the open source models are really going to take up a larger and larger share of the market, including companies deploying their own open source models, especially when you look at some of the new like mixture of experts. Like the new Quinn models are phenomenally performant and efficient, even on really commodity hardware. My expectation is that, we've seen these models get bigger, but that also means more expensive, and slower. I think we're starting to see some amazing optimization techniques coming out of places like China, where the hardware is more constrained. And so I ultimately, someone's going to hold me to this in a few years. I fully expect OpenAI to go bankrupt in 5 years, or like sell for basically pennies on the dollar compared to their current evaluation. And I think that open source things, whether it's Llama or others in the US or like Quinn from like Alibaba, are going to be where it's at. And I think people will probably, in larger companies, host their own hardware to support those.
Very interesting. I'm an open source advocate myself. I like to believe that the knowledge of the masses will win. Go for it, Alan.
I do agree like 90% of what Rob says. I don't actually disagree with any of it. That extra 10% is more of an addition, or kind of thinking about it a slightly different way. I agree we shouldn't really be, there's not as much of a need to fine tune and get very specific homegrown models. But rather, the way I think about it is maybe we start enhancing some of these models with tools that are very specific. I think in the short term, when we're looking at how the general public is going to be using LLMs, it's going to be in a very, very personalized, almost like personal assistant manner. With all these tools that are coming out, I saw in the chat that people are talking about MCP servers and all that fun stuff. With those blowing up and the capabilities that you can provide to agents to do very specific things and hook into your life, I see that as the thing that's going to be more the focus, is tuning the tools that these LLMs are running instead of actually tuning the models themselves.
Yeah. I think this is a really fantastic question. It's like kind of the paradox question. It's my question too, so I'm going to allow it to be asked. If AI learns from the content it's being trained on and tends to generate the average of the data, what happens when engineers stop producing well-researched, low-level original content? Could we be approaching the peak of AI capability? That is such a good question. I'm giving you a thumbs up for that. Go for it, Alan.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to it. It's scary to think about. I mean, I would say probably another way to phrase that question is the quality of the answers in these LLMs going to get lower and lower over time? That's how I kind of read that. I think overall, no, because the reasoning capabilities are going to continue to get better and better. So yes, they've been trained on data, but they're also going to be able to reason a little bit better. We might reach a point where it plateaus for a while until we reach a point where the reasoning capabilities really take off. But I in just a quick yes or no answer to this, I don't think so.
You don't think we've peaked yet? Go
Yeah,
for it.
I agree with that completely as well. I think that with the advent of RAGs, MCP, and tools, we're seeing a trend to actually move the important data out of the model itself. That isn't to say there's not data in the model, and of course data is used for the models, but I imagine a world in the future where the models are handling the reason and the logic using data that comes from external sources, at which point your external sources end up being like what controls a lot of that. I guess I'm kind of giving the opposite answer of my previous on whether RAG versus LLM is more important, contradicting myself already. But I do see it moving in that world where you see more of that segmentation, more reasoning inside of the models, because this also allows the models to be smaller too, which makes lower latency, easier to host, with more reliance on tools, external data pushing into it. I also do think though that even if these AIs are generating slop and it's going everywhere and we've got it, all over the internet and other places, that doesn't actually mean the slop is making it into the training. There is people like to think that, the training's 80% of it, but the data is 80% of it. People do so much work getting that data into a place that's good for training. And some of that even means, using other models to help evaluate and remove bad data, human curation. So I think that it's just another problem that has to be solved, not necessarily a massive blocker.
The thread is simply hilarious. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to try and combine two questions into one as our last question from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up with one last question for me. This is, I have to stop sharing. Let me find what I'm sharing so I can stop sharing. Hang on a second. There it is. Okay. And what I wanted to share was the question about, it says not related to IAC, it's AI, sorry. But assuming you're running a tech interview for DevOps platform position, what questions would you ask a candidate on Terraform IaC topics? But pause, I want to add another question that's similar to something somebody else asked, which is, in an AI-driven world, how do you GPT-proof your interviewing and hiring? So I feel like it's a combo question of what would you ask today, and also when you think about it in the context of, co-pilot-driven kind of interviewing.
Yeah, I'm going to take this because I'm literally interviewing people around this right now. So it's actually a fantastic question. One of the things is that you actually have to interview during the interview these days. A lot of companies are like, yeah, just go do this code exercise and come back. Okay, you did good, you did bad. But now you don't know if people did the code exercise. And to be honest, you never did to begin with. I hired a data scientist once, and it turned out his wife did all of the interview work. And so we hired him and he couldn't make the graph. So, things do get complicated. I think the thing that solves it in a lot of cases is actually talking to people. If I'm in an interview, you start with the simple things, and as silly as this sounds, what's the difference between a data source and a resource? I have seen that have like a 50% success rate in eliminating candidates who've never actually used Terraform but said they have. As weird as that might sound. You ask them about the frameworks, you ask them about the questions, and you ask them questions that show whether they have experience or not. And of course, you have to gauge this differently for junior engineers versus senior engineers. If somebody's a junior and they come in, you're going to be focused a little bit more on their thought processes, how they research, stuff like that. If somebody's more senior, ask them questions about how they solve specific problems. And if the answer is always, yeah, I use ChatGPT, well, how did you solve the problem? If they can't answer it, you'd be surprised. It often comes up in conversation very easily. Just talking about these things, if they don't actually have experience with it, that conversation falls apart rather rapidly. So I kind of feel as long as you're
wrap up. We're in the last 5 seconds of the session. This was a fantastic answer. I'm sorry, Alan. It looks like you're not going to have a chance to reply. But thank you both so much. I think this was a tremendous, tremendous panel. I think we had a lot of fun. I think the audience asked a lot of questions. Don't forget, both of them have sessions, so you can continue asking them lots of hard questions at their sessions. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for being here, Alan and Robert. It was really a fantastic session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.